I want this to really be a conversation, not to feel like it's, just a pummeling of questions at you, but we do want to be careful that our voices don't overlap. And I'm probably the worst offender, so that Kenya can actually interpret each of us individually.
Been good, Bridget. You've been good.
Thanks, Kenya.
Hey everybody, we're ready to get started. We are live.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jessica. And we're here for another weekly discussion on Facebook Live. This week, we're excited to have a conversation about reimagining how we deliver on the promise of public education in Kentucky. It's such a critical moment in time as our districts have been trying to figure out whether it's safe to get back in traditional school buildings, whether they need to be completely virtual because of the health pandemic, and all of the gray areas in between. And what we know more than anything is at this moment in time, we must identify innovations that are going to prove to serve us better as we come out of this pandemic and in the years after the pandemic than when we went into the pandemic. So I'm excited to have a wonderful group of panelists with us today to talk about what they're seeing nationally, the bright spots, as well as the challenges or the concerns they have as we seek to reimagine how we deliver on the promise of public education. So to ground this in the context of Kentucky's story, to those who know Kentucky's story, we've been quite proud that Kentucky has climbed from the bottom of the national rankings in so many indicators of education to roughly the middle, give or take, depending on what indicator you look at. So we've had a success story in Kentucky, but we also know that we've only made the first leap. We have the next giant leap to go, and we don't want this pandemic to slow us down. So as an example, prior to the pandemic, Kentucky ranked 26th nationally in fourth grade reading proficiency. And that meant that 35% of Kentucky public school fourth graders scored proficient or above on the 2019 NAEP. So we were still leaving a lot of kids behind based on our proficiency standards. We ranked 39th in eighth grade math and have always struggled with mathematics. 29% of Kentucky public school eighth graders scored proficient or above. So we were leaving many students behind when it comes to those proficiency standards in mathematics. And these inequities were also apparent in the delivery of education for students of color and low-income students, with vast differences showing through on state assessments between different student groups. As an example, our progress has been simply stagnant over the last 12 years for African American learners. Fourth graders holding flat at only 14% at or above the reading proficiency standard on NAEP, indicating that we have simply failed to deliver for African American students. This we cannot allow to persist, and we cannot let COVID be the reason that we continue to stagnate or not realize the gains we need to. So the pandemic has laid these inequities bare without a doubt, not only adding another layer of inequity, the digital divide, but making it difficult to provide traditional instruction for the students who are already succeeding, and nearly impossible to provide resources and adequate instruction to remediate the kids who are already behind. So as we move into the 6th month of the pandemic and a new school year, innovations are being made to help all kids in each school and district. But we must lift up those examples of innovations to create a truly equitable system when we emerge from this really difficult time in our nation's history. So with me this afternoon to start to peel the onion on these innovations and shine the light forward, I'm pleased to have Denise Forte, who is the Senior Vice President for Partnership and Engagement at the Education Trust. Denise, if you'll just share with us a little bit of your background and your work at the Ed Trust.
Sure, thank you, Bridget. Good afternoon, everyone. As Bridget mentioned, Denise Fort with the Education Trust. I joined the trust about, I guess a little bit over a year ago now, but primarily my background is in federal legislative and executive policy regarding families and children and education. So I'm thrilled to be here with you guys today and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Denise. We also have Robin Lake, who is the director of the Center on Reinventing Public Education. And no, they didn't just come up with that name in the last few months. Robin, welcome. Share with us a little bit about your work and background with the center.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to join you. I am a researcher, first and foremost, and I direct the Center on Reinventing Public Education at University of Washington, a group of analysts who have over the years tried to understand how public school systems impede or promote innovation and quality and equity at scale. And in this moment, we worked hard to try to bring data and evidence to the conversation to help folks learn and improve as quickly as possible.
Excellent. We look forward to hearing about your work, Robin. We also have John Bailey with us, who is a visiting fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, otherwise known as AEI. John, welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Give us a little thumbnail sketch of your work.
That's great. Thank you so much. It's so good to be with all of you today. I am visiting fellow at AI. We've been looking at a bunch of different facets with COVID and with schools, everything from analyzing school reopening plans. We did an 8-week survey of parents to get a sense of their perspectives and hopes and aspirations and also fears with reopening. And I've also pulled together just a motley crew of a very strong bipartisan group of leaders from the federal government, state government, and local school districts to put together a blueprint for reopening. So we're really sort of passionate about trying to explore all the different challenges schools are facing and seeing if we can identify different solutions.
Yeah, great. Thank you, John. We look forward to the conversation. And last, but certainly not least, Alex Ferrier is a senior analyst with Bellwether Education Partners and a Kentuckian through and through. Alex, welcome. Share with us a little bit about your work, background in Kentucky, and your work with Bellwether.
Yeah, well, first off, thank you for having me today and for hosting this conversation. Really looking forward to it. So Bellwether Education Partners is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to improving outcomes for underserved students by working with public, private, and nonprofit education organizations. And in my current role, I work on the policy side of our house, helping to advise clients and provide research to help them better understand policy implications and what they have for underserved students. My background in Kentucky, I've been a Kentuckian for 5 years, and in my time here, I've worked at our state's longitudinal data system and for the Kentucky Department of Education in the Commissioner's Office. And prior to that, I was doing some state policy level work in Connecticut. So a lot of experience in the state level education policy side of things.
Gotcha. And I know you had to throw in that East Coast state there, Alex, but we're still going to claim you as a Kentuckian through and through.
I appreciate it.
And we have Kenya McPheeters with us, interpreting for the deaf and the hard of hearing to make this conversation accessible to as many folks as possible. We're grateful as always to Kenya for the work that she does and her support of our work. Thank you, Kenya. All right, so let's just jump right in. We're all experiencing this moment in time, the uncertainty of it all, either directly as a parent or indirectly in some form or fashion. And I think all of you assembled here are looking for trends and innovations that we can kind of amplify, leverage. What are you seeing across the country as schools and districts try to adapt to a new teaching and learning environment?
Happy to jump in here. You know, one of the missions of the Education Trust is to ensure that we are narrowing the opportunity gaps for students of color and low income students. So our focus is really on driving home the equity narrative and also giving advocates the tools to help advocate for themselves on statewide policy issues. And for that, we're so glad to have Pritchard as a partner in that work. And they've really been leading the charge along with the Kentucky Education Equity Coalition to bring good things to Kentucky. So we're excited about that. You know, the innovations, and there have been a few that are very equity centered that I just like to call out. we put together a district guide, actually taking a look at what was going on in, we wouldn't necessarily call them models, because there is no model for dealing with a pandemic, particularly, and we're all learning that right now. But some of the more, I think, insightful and impactful opportunities have been around the issue of engagement, where we know that Phoenix Union District has done a everyday model, which they are doing outreach to students with all of the staff in that district, touching every student every day, making sure that they are able to engage with the work and with their school system. And and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later in terms of our socio-emotional and academic work that we've been doing, is so critical at this time to make sure that students know that they are still cared for, especially in light of the dual pandemics that they are facing, and which, have just fully exacerbated some of the inequities that they have lived with on a daily basis, whether it's housing inequity, income inequity, racial inequities. So any opportunity to hone in on how we can engage families and engage students, and these models where you are able to actually touch and engage with a student every day has been so important. And they have had really good rates of engagement. And the flip side is hearing from other districts who know that they have lost anywhere from 10 to 20% of their students and still have not been able to reconnect with them even over the summer. And it's clear that we are not going to eliminate those opportunity gaps. At the very minimum, we don't know how our students are doing. We don't know whether they have access to, connectivity, internet, hotspots, computers generally, and we don't know their own well-being. So I just want to lift that up as something that we were excited to learn about, and we are hoping more school districts can engage in that way.
And that's a common thread we've heard since we've been having these conversations since last spring when we all began social distancing. Kind of a surprising bright spot or silver lining was students and teachers and families saying they felt like they were experiencing kind of enhanced relationships as a result. I think in those early months where everybody was trying to figure out how to get it done together. So definitely a bright spot we want to carry forward and double down on. Robin, how about you as you look across the nation? What's giving you hope as an important innovation that's happening as a result of this pandemic?
I think the thing that gives me the most hope is seeing how many educators and parents and community leaders and students are just rising to the occasion, and kind of the fire in the belly that we see when people are presented with a hard problem and we free up people to start proposing solutions. Like I think that's a big takeaway from this. There was a lot of latent problem solving potential out there that we hadn't tapped yet, and we're seeing that come to fruition in so many different ways. We've been tracking what districts are doing in this moment and lifting up examples of some innovations that school system leaders are putting forth. There's too much really to mention here. I will say we're going to be coming out of the next couple of weeks with some really clear, promising practices that should be helpful. But, everything from addressing racial equity in their reopening plans to thinking about using assessments really creatively. There's a ton of great work out there. I think the challenge in front of us right now is how do we identify those things, lift them up, and move them quickly so that they're adopted. That's always the challenge in public education.
And Robin, I'm really interested just your note about kind of freeing people up to problem solve. So are there ways in particular that you see states or systems, districts freeing teachers up or states freeing districts up so that they can focus on the problem solving as opposed to kind of rapid response?
Yeah, and I think it's a tension, right? And I'll just put it out there that a lot of school districts in particular are trying to work through, well, what do we have to hold really tight right now? Because it's a crisis. We can't let, 1,000 flowers bloom everywhere. we've got to solve problems very, very quickly. So that calls for an aligned strategy. However, we want to pull up the innovations as fast as we can get them. So, over the years, my center has worked with a number of school districts that try to really decentralized problem solving. We call them portfolio systems. And a lot of them right now are just thinking about what's the tight, loose strategy. And so many of them are saying to schools, we're going to put some boundaries on this so that, it's not just a free for all, but propose to us within those boundaries what is possible. And they're really good at listening and capturing knowledge and testing and changing as they go. And the big the big realization, I think, is that nimble matters in this moment, and how school districts can create that ability to move quickly, but also truly be nimble. It's an art, but there are some folks who are really showing the way.
Yeah, thank you. John, what are you seeing that's making you say, okay, there we go, we're starting to get it right?
Well, I'm not sure if we've gotten it right yet, but what I am optimistic about, what I'm hopeful about, is that the crisis of the moment and the necessity that it's creating is going to create very rapid feedback loops and improvement loops. So I think as we're already seeing, some schools are reopening. One of the best prepared districts that I had thought going into this new school year was going to be Miami-Dade, and they've even had some problems with the tech systems crashing. And I think the key to this is not the absence of problems, it's how quickly schools identify those problems, respond to them, fix them, and make the experience better for teachers and for students. I also saw the other day, a parent was managing 34 different logins. That's not sustainable. I can't even keep track of, I was lucky to log into Zoom today. So I think we're going to need to simplify that for teachers. We're going to need to simplify it for schools, but and students, but I'm hugely optimistic on that. I'm also optimistic that just in seeing and talking to a lot of companies in Silicon Valley, they're just seeing double and sometimes triple digit growth with some of their services. And if any time that we've needed sort of good technology platforms to choreograph instruction and what parents are doing at home and what kids are learning, it's now. And so I'm just grateful that we have Silicon Valley entrepreneurs working side by side with teachers, side by side with parents. So all these things make me somewhat optimistic, but I know there's a steep mountain ahead of us too.
Well, I think an important note that you just made is, there are going to be problems, period.
Yes.
There are going to be problems within problems, after problems, before problems. And so maybe just accepting that frees us up, right, to just do the problem solving.
Yeah. We've always talked that we want students to have a growth mindset, right? Now we need the system to have a growth mindset.
Yeah.
And persevere, have that grit, have the resilience, and work through it in order to kind of get to the other side here.
Yeah. So Alex, you've been looking at pods, kind of following some of that work. You're seeing some innovation. What are your reflections at this point?
Well, we're seeing pods pop up as a response on the part of some parents that are not happy with the offerings that districts and schools have been providing to them. But on the side of districts and systems that have succeeded in adapting to our new circumstance, what I've been seeing is that there are systems that are getting the basics right, and that's allowing them to John's point, innovate a little bit more quickly or respond to problems as they're popping up. And so, Fordham Institute just put out a report on 8 high-performing charter management organizations and what they've done in response to the pandemic. And what it really comes down to is just some of the basic stuff that we've already heard about on this call. To Denise's point, communication is such a foundational element of finding and servicing problems before they become major issues for students on just the basic needs level of, are they in a safe environment? Are they being fed? Do they have the technological resources they need? All the way to making sure that, assignments are getting through and being completed on time. So we're seeing, systems that, to Robin's point, are being able to provide a framework of, here's what we're going to keep solid and consistent compared to what we had before versus, where are we going to give teachers and school leaders the freedom to try new things? And one of the common elements that we're seeing is that schools and districts and charter management organizations, even private schools that have a really well thought out and coherent curriculum is serving as a really strong foundation for educators and leaders to innovate on top of. And if you don't have some of those basics in place, your communication structures, your ability to reach students and serve their needs, and the foundation of a solid curriculum, it's really hard to make some of the innovations work unless you're getting the blocking and tackling of education, remote or in person, correct.
So we hear a lot of, as I'm sure you do in other states, a lot of back and forth from parents and communities about school reopening, our buildings reopening versus virtual, the need for parents to be able to get back to work, their kids to be able to get back to school, but fear of the health issues. How are each of you responding to that, what feels like a very kind of binary choice that our districts are under right now and parents are under at the moment? How do you or your organizations respond to that kind of call from parents? We've got to get kids back to school, or, we can't be back in school. Robin?
Sure. I mean, I'll start with just a little bit of information that has been striking to us, that we're seeing very different approaches in different parts of the country. So when we break down differences in reopening plans by urban, rural, suburban, we see a strikingly, dramatically different picture, where most urban districts are planning to open mostly remotely, at least to start the year, and on the flip side, rural's mostly in person. And we've wondered what's going on behind the scenes, what's causing those decisions. We did some analysis about what role politics and different political pressures might play in that, and we do think that there's something going on there in a lot of places, which is concerning to us because we think science should be the primary driver here. But to your broader point, it's clear that most districts are allowing families an opt-out measure, which I think is important. For families that really just don't feel comfortable for whatever reason, they can find a remote option. Whether or not it's high quality is another question, and lots to discuss there. But for me, it's all about choices and options and individualized solutions right now. And so I do think that many districts are going down that route of offering options. And I also think that many school systems are starting to think about a variety of different ways to meet the needs of kids with the most vulnerable situations, the highest needs, kids with special needs, just kids with disabilities, kids who don't have a home, or those who just really struggled with the virtual learning environment. They need something sometimes in person, whereas other kids are fine, at home with their families. And so again, just, I think we need to get to this question of how do we individualize, meet all kids' needs in this moment, and hopefully that's a lesson we can carry forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Any others, John or Alex or Denise, on this, what feels like a very tense environment between get back into the building or keep kids out?
Yeah, I'll take a shot at this. In part, I feel like this is where the absence of federal leadership has put schools in an untenable situation. So we have superintendents and principals and teachers who are education experts. They know how to provide instruction. They know how to organize a classroom. They are not epidemiologists. And what we've done by not creating at least some sort of coherent framework for if a community spread and incident rate is X, this is what that means in terms of opening and reopening schools, means that we've now put principals, superintendents, and school boards in the position of refereeing that. And as you would expect, it has created massive tension because like no one knows who to trust or what level to trust. And I think that is part of the reason when you have that uncertainty creates fear. And when you have fearful people, they're always going to go for the more conservative option. And that conservative option is no one's going to die if you go to remote learning, right? And so, I think that's part of what we found ourselves in, is going to a remote by default, because it's been difficult to reassure parents that coming to school is safe, and reassuring teachers that it's safe. And I think I'm hopeful because I've seen a couple frameworks emerging that give guidance for states and for schools that say, if the community spread is X, keep your high school students at home, but bring back your elementary school students. It gets us out of this binary. You're either all remote or you're hybrid, because it says that, like, if the community spread is 7%, maybe that's not safe enough to bring your high school kids back, but bring your elementary school kids back. It could be that we need to adopt something like what Israel did, which is they went to all remote learning, but they kept the schools open for their special needs students. Like, we need to think creatively about that. Like, maybe we don't bring all the students back, but we bring special needs students and those that are most at risk of falling further and further behind, right?
We shrink the germ pools, right?
Yes, exactly. Like, I think there are creative ways to this, but we haven't been able to explore that creativity because, it's been so difficult for superintendents and principals to communicate to parents why something is safe. And this is where we really needed the CDC. We needed people with medical degrees and epidemiology backgrounds to be able to say, we've looked at all the research. We've looked at these studies coming out of reopening of schools in other parts of the world, and here's our best sense of the risks. And outline the risks and outline our confidence in those risks. Like, I think people can handle that, but we just have not been great at communicating it.
So, John, in the absence of that federal leadership, do you find yourself then encouraging or looking for that leadership at the state level from a governor's office or a Department of Education to provide that that expertise, that direction?
Yeah, we've seen this in numerous polling that, people trust Dr. Tony Fauci, they trust the CDC, and they trust their state health officials, right? Like, what they want to see in terms of communicating when something is medically safe is not a state chief or even a governor. They want to see someone with a lab coat that has like a medical degree and be able to sort of communicate that. And so state health officials, super critically important on this. And I've been pleased too, like a number of schools have hired chief health officers. Miami-Dade did that, like super smart. Like, you want to build a trust relationship with parents that go to, in terms of who convey the trust. And then frankly, free up teachers and principals and superintendents to do what they do best, which is thinking about instructional strategies.
Yeah, great. Denise, you seem to be seeing some of this too, or agreeing that absolutely that's what we need.
Well, as a parent myself, that's mostly why I'm nodding my head. I think it is definitely, we've already seen that folks are having to rely on the next level of leadership wherever they can get it. But I just couldn't agree more with John. And we have been saying since the very beginning about return to school that you have to look at the science. You have to be prepared to understand what the science is saying. We need to have PPE for our teachers. We need to have testing, tracing, all of those things. And ultimately, people are, and we're seeing this across the country, they're sort of taking their own risk as they assume that they could take. And it is sort of intriguing. I'd love to see if anybody's following parents on all this, and hopefully they'll continue to do parent polling, especially in those communities that open and then have had to close and then reopen again, just how that's been perceived by parents and its impact on student learning.
Yeah, great. So the other kind of immediate issue, I think, as we've thought about all this and started to respond to it in the spring, is the issue of the digital divide. Recognizing that just moving everybody to remote, it has its own set of problems. In a very rural state like Kentucky and a poor state, we have issues with accessibility because of affordability and because of the infrastructure not being there in many of the parts of our state. So And that's not just an issue for K-12. It's an issue for our post-secondary students. It's an issue for remote work, for access to healthcare remotely. So best practices that you're seeing, and Alex, maybe I'll go to you first here, that you're seeing in kind of closing that digital divide to give parents more options.
Well, as John pointed out earlier, this is an area where lack of federal leadership is really harming the recovery on this front, where the CARES Act only provided a small fraction of funding for K-12 and for helping to close the digital divide. And it's evident here in Kentucky, we still have a long way to go. I think the Lieutenant Governor mentioned the other day that we still have 32,000 students here in Kentucky alone that lack internet access at home. And for kids that even do have internet access, when there's multiple kids in a house all trying to hop on Google Classroom or do a video conference at the same time, it's really, really challenging. So this is an area where states, districts, and parents are going to beg, borrow, and steal and do what they can to get kids access to devices and broadband internet. But there's only so much that these entities can do without strong federal support to help close that digital divide.
And we've been pushing on Congress, as I know others have, for some funding in the next stimulus package, which I guess it's anybody's guess when we might see that that package moved forward. But anybody tracking that and have any thoughts about whether or not Congress is going to step up to the plate here on internet and broadband?
Well, John and I have been involved in a number of conversations on this front, and it's been such a pleasure to work with him on this issue. My sense of the world, and I'd love to hear from John and others on this too, is fundamentally people understand the issue, but again, it is a matter of the will to do something about it, which is just the broader case on doing any type of relief package. Things came together so quickly. For the first 3 or 4 packages, I think everyone sort of presumed that people would see the need and then respond to that need. And unfortunately, that hasn't been the case. We are working hard at the Education Trust with partners on the ground to make sure we continue to apply that pressure at the federal level, continue to make sure that people know that this is an urgent matter. But the fact is, the House is not in session, the Senate's not in session, and they won't be back until, I guess, next week after Labor Day. And it's hard to know whether that will bring about some more pressure to get folks in the room to start talking again. But
we are here. Yeah, we are here broadcasting on Facebook Live in the bluegrass bourbon state of Kentucky. So if we have any messages for Leader McConnell, we're in the right state at the moment on Zoom. I know you all will turn that back around on me and say, okay, what are you going to do?
Yeah, I just want to, I have the great fortune of, because of these broadband calls, of getting to talk to Denise weekly and the folks at Education Trust, and an incredible coalition of groups that have all sort of elevated this as a need. It is, I'll admit, it's been a bit puzzling. Like, it's just, if all of a sudden we shut down every school bus, so buses weren't taking kids to school, there would be immediate outcry. And yet that's the equivalent of what's happening when we shift kids over to remote learning and don't give them a device or connectivity, that we're essentially not giving them a bus to get to education. And also, and so there's urgent need to do this. It's relative to the size of the package they're talking about, very small. This is like $4 billion out of a total package that, according to the Secretary of Treasury yesterday, he's willing to go up to 1.5 trillion as part of this next package. And so the amount of benefit we get in terms of making sure kids can keep learning, to minimize learning loss, and also just to make sure households have connectivity to access government benefits and telemedicine, it just feels like a no-brainer. But to your point, this is all going to be decided not through the education committees that so many of us have become comfortable with knowing how to engage. It's going to be at a leadership level. This is with Speaker Pelosi and McCarthy over in the House, with Senator McConnell and Schumer over in the Senate. and a very few people at the White House. And so Kentucky plays a very important role in this. And from what I'm seeing, I just don't think a lot of congressional staff still fully appreciate the scope and the enormity of the digital divide and what that means. And so we have to make that real and beyond numbers. Somehow the numbers just don't seem to be motivating. But I'm hopeful that, again, I'm optimistic there's going to be another economic package. It might get rolled up with the budget that they have to do by the end of the month. There'll be additional dollars there. We just have to make sure they're prioritizing this as like something to solve as part of this
as a key component of an economic package, because it's both the immediate, if we think about work and access to healthcare, and immediate and long-term if we think about education's role in our development as a country, in our development as states. So it really is a critical issue.
Yeah.
So
and Bridget, as you pointed out, I mean, the connectivity issues, they are so central to so many areas that we inhabit, right? Whether it's healthcare, just having access to community information, emergency preparedness, how do you even apply for unemployment insurance or apply to get a job? That it's just central to all of that. And we really need to be thinking about the role. I sometimes wonder having it isolated as an education thing is what is harming us, as opposed to like almost making an emergency preparedness issue. But I totally agree with John. We have got to, go into overdrive on how we impress upon Congress the urgency of this situation.
And I think underscore that it's not just accessibility, it's adequacy. So Alex, to your point, when you've got multiple people in a household trying to work, trying to do school, bandwidth becomes an issue. So we could say that some families it's accessible, but it's not adequate. It's the wheels are falling off of that bus. It's not getting where it needs to go. So I think the adequacy piece is really important as well. And so hence the funding need. I want to move us to, these conversations always go fast, and I want to get us to kind of two structural pieces that I think are really important in our conversation. And the first, Robin, I'd like to direct to you because it's about assessment and our conversation now about assessment. In the midst of this upheaval, everything's been turned upside down. Your thoughts on the continued importance of assessment and how we approach assessment as states, districts, and schools in the fall, and then also into next spring when we're trying to gauge how much loss, how much gain, where do we stand?
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, I'm completely on board with the connectivity question. States and the federal government have to figure this out. On the other hand, I am worried that that is taking up so much airtime, unfortunately, because it's not being solved, that we haven't gotten to teaching and learning. And so the assessment piece, I think, is absolutely critical for a number of reasons. I think, they're probably obvious, but I'll just say, this is going to be an enormously complex problem for educators to solve, figuring out where each kid is, both academically and in terms of health, welfare, social, emotional needs. It's really challenging for educators to do that, and we can't ask them to fly blind. We also can't ask parents to simply trust that learning loss will be solved in this critical moment, that their kids who haven't gotten adequate teaching over the past 6 months will just, everything will be fixed by business as usual. For those reasons, we think assessment really matters. So, one of the things that we've worked hard to do is pull together assessment experts and just provide some clear guidance about what kinds of assessments should be used, how. We've got some good resources on that for people who want to dig into the details. But, the bottom line is, we're not going to have a lot of good data at the state level. So we've got to get strategic and serious about when we want to do state tests. And we've got to provide school districts and educators with diagnostic assessments that can really say something meaningful. And then we have to, I guess probably the most important principle with the assessments is prioritizing, making sure that we know what we're trying to do with these things, because every moment of instructional time is going to matter. We've got to use tests really strategically. They've got to be geared toward what teachers need in a moment to be able to make sure that kids are, really zeroing in on the skills and the content areas that they may have missed that will prevent them from engaging in the material that's being presented to them. So it's it's a lot of work to get this right. I think that now is a really important moment to think about, well, assessments probably needed to evolve. They were a little bit of a blunt instrument, and there was a lot of pushback coming from parents and teachers around how much testing was going on and for what purpose. And in this moment, teachers and parents know that data matters. They know that the child in front of them needs help, and we've got to figure out how to get it to them. So that's our push, is let's use this moment to really reinvent assessments so that they're meaningful and powerful.
So, and the diagnostic is so important as we head into the fall to get a baseline. I'm thinking of where students are, to make sure that we're actually moving them ahead in whatever way we can facilitate their learning. Robin, what is your view, the center's view, on the role of state assessments into the spring, and states maybe now requesting waivers from state assessments? Is that appropriate right now? Should we be holding on to thinking about those state assessments in the spring and ensuring they're still happening?
Personally, I think we absolutely should. I'm a researcher, and so I believe that data is critical. We shouldn't be afraid of information, but we should be careful how we use that information when we get it. And certainly there are a lot of reasons to be careful in how we do state assessments in the spring, just in terms of, are kids at home? Are they in the classroom? How do we make sure that the assessment results that we're getting are real? And how do we administer them in a way that makes sense? And then, the question is how will the information be used? Will educators be held accountable based on those state tests, or will a fuller picture be put in place so that we can figure out, between diagnostic tests and state exams, what's really going on, and where adults need to be, stepping up and doing work in new ways. So I think there's no question in my mind that we just do them, and then we're adults, we can figure this out. We can sort through what they mean.
If we come back to, this is information, right? It's information that's important for the public. It's important to be transparent about it. It's not judgment, right? So Denise, the Ed Trust, I know, is looking at this through and has always had a firm stance on this from an equity standpoint. Absolutely. We need to know how our students are doing.
Absolutely.
Even if the results aren't good.
That's right. Look, assessments should be used to help identify those systemic issues that are present in all of our systems, so that we better know how to use the systems that are available to us to address those issues. And I think particularly when it comes to students of color, low-income students, students with disabilities, English language learners, this information can be so helpful to making sure they get the supports that they need. We see this as a critical civil rights tool. We see it as a critical tool for helping schools, parents, and the communities know how our students are doing. And at this time more than ever, when we are at such different places, within a state, as you pointed out, Bridget, and then across states, as what schools are deciding to do, it is probably even more important to have really good information that our school leaders can use to, are we doing right by kids of color, students from low-income communities, when it comes to math, when it comes to reading, history, geography, all of that stuff, art. Are we doing right by them, and what do we need to do to continue to make sure that they are supported? And again, especially at this time.
Yeah, absolutely. John, on assessment, what is your view?
Assessments are critical. Like I just couldn't agree more with Denise and Robin. It's information, and what we have right now, like there's you know, in the military they talk about the fog of war. We have the fog of COVID. Like it is so hard to see 2 or 3 weeks ahead of us, and part of what we can't see is just uh, how we are losing students, where are we losing students, what students are we losing, and so assessments are one tool in that toolbox. There's going to be other ones. There's going to be diagnostic assessments. A lot of these digital platforms that people are using, whether it's like Zern or Khan Academy, have teacher dashboards and parent dashboards, all critical. But one of the tools that states have is these state assessments, and administering them and committing to that is going to be important. And again, like we should be thinking about that now, including what happens if we have to widen the test windows, what happens if we have to do some of them online. But it's just critical to have that information. I think it is totally open for us to talk about how to pause and certain types of accountability and other things. But we have to be really honest that we have a whole country where some students are going to be learning only remotely. Some are going to be learning remotely and in school. Some are going to be learning all in school, and some are going to be learning hybrid. And we have to know like how those different modalities are impacting different types of students. And unfortunately, what we know is that even when things were working before COVID, they weren't working before COVID. We were losing way too many kids. And one of the ways we knew that was from these state tests. And so I just think it's important for us to commit to it. So we're not debating whether they should be administered. We should be problem solving and developing solutions for how to best administer them and how to best use that information to make decisions, and frankly, to inform some of the federal response too. Like, I don't think this is the only fiscal package we're going to see. Like, I think we're going to see another one in 2021 and beyond. And Congress is going to need information too. This is a great source to get it. So.
If we're going to commit to delivering on the promise of public education, we need to measure how we're doing. So I want to, John, I want to stay with you for a minute, and then Alex pick up here in kind of our remaining minutes. And Alex, if you want to jump in on assessment, then please do. But John, while you're speaking, I want to get to part of a conversation that you and I had, I think last week, and that being that, you know, what we're seeing in this moment is kind of more parents actually in the classroom with their kids. So they were really almost literally in their kids' classrooms in the spring months. And now they're going to be in classrooms again with their kids in the fall months. So our parents are really, they're a fly on the wall. They're really seeing education in very different ways at the moment. I think there are conversations about expectations and meeting expectations, and if learning is happening the way we think it is, and if teachers have the resources and supports. So if you would just kind of reflect for a few minutes what you're seeing as a result of all of us kind of being in the classroom together.
Yeah, I mean, it's thank you. I mean, it's a great prompt, and it is a great image too. That, you know, in the past, parents sort of.
I think we need a cartoonist to pick up on this, right? So,
yeah.
cartoonists out there.
Trademark it really quickly.
Yes.
Alex, get on that. So, but I mean, you know, in the past, like the way a lot of parents just experienced schools were through what their children shared with them through, you know, once every couple months teacher conferences, you know, and maybe sort of loosely, lightly checking on something on the website. And what I think we're seeing in data that Robin's collecting and that we've seen in polling is that, like, now all of a sudden that parents are being asked to be part of the remote learning. They're having a chance to see whether or not kids are getting live interactive instruction or if it's all passive watching videos. And what I think we're seeing is like a wave of hyper engaged parents that we've never seen before. And I don't know what that looks like a year from now. Even when we get post-COVID, I don't think this is a genie that goes back in the bottle, that you're going to have a group of parents that are hyper engaged, many of them appreciating in bigger ways, like what an in-person instructional opportunity in school and teachers do, but also a lot of like frustrated and parents that have gone through an experience and what do they do with that experience and how they bring that experience to bear on other decisions going forward. But I think you're seeing this with parents opting for learning pods. They're saying, okay, like if all we're getting is like 1 hour a day of live interaction and like a little bit of like videos, like I'm forced out of necessity to try to do something else with our kids. And so I think pods are sort of not a thing unto themselves. They're a symptom of this sort of other type of pent up both fear and anxiety and worry that parents are sort of exhibiting. But I think we're going to see a lot of other facets of that over the next coming. And there's we're just starting to get data on this now too, about the number of parents disenrolling from schools. I think Los Angeles saw 6,000 fewer kindergarten enrollments. It's about 13%. It's too soon to say like what these trends are, but they all point to a very large group of parents with a very sort of large subset of groups that are frustrated. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that large of frustrated parents.
Yeah. So it's an interesting moment in my mind to really gather rich information about preferences, and for the public system to utilize that rich information about preferences and figure out how we reimagine, how we deliver differently based on those preferences. So Alex, you've been following the pod conversation, which is clearly parents signaling, I'm doing it on my own, I'm doing something different, we're doing it in small groups. It has pros and cons. The equity concerns have been widely written about. What are you seeing, and what do you think about the public system responding to those preferences that are being clearly stated at the moment?
Yeah, well, a couple things there. On the equity front, there's a lot that communities and even policymakers can do to help to make this pod phenomenon more equitable and accessible to families that don't have a lot of financial means to go out and hire their own private tutor to create a micro school in their own backyard. So some of the things that communities can do is find space community centers or churches or empty offices that families and schools might be able to use for small learning pods, being able to provide curriculum and instructional resources to families to support learning for students. But the biggest thing is funding. 50CAN, Mark Porter McGee and Jarrell Bradford put out a really provocative policy brief titled Fund Everything. And it was about not only getting support to districts and public school systems, but also giving parents money to help them find and navigate, what's the best option for my kid? Is it going to be to go through my district and provide funding to get distance learning opportunities through them, or is it going to be to try and find a more creative solution that fits the unique needs of my child, whether or not they have individualized education plan that's not being serviced well through the digital learning environment or other special needs. So I think there's a lot more that could be done if there was more financial support coming, particularly from the federal government, to parents. And just to loop back on the assessment topic real quick, I think one other aspect that policymakers need to start thinking about now is how they're going to adapt their accountability systems to this current moment, because this year matters for kids and for families, and it needs to matter for the adults in the systems that are serving kids and for the policymakers that are shaping those systems. So as we're rethinking how we're delivering assessment, both getting state assessments delivered in some form and also thinking about ways to adapt assessments to this current moment, we also need to think about how the accountability systems that we have, what are we asking those systems to do moving forward, and how do we need to adapt our policies to meet that need? My colleagues and I have done a lot of writing about this over the summer, so please check that out on Bellwether's website. But I think accountability is something that's being overlooked right now, and to do so would be to the disservice of students who really need that attention.
And we will link reports from each of our panelists in the Facebook comments so that watchers can get that information. And we'll also share it in a blog that we do after our conversation. On the pod piece, I really want to kind of dig down for a minute into parents putting these pods together and their possibly being opportunities for the public system to respond in kind by establishing pods in the neighborhoods or in the places where kids need them most and need to be able to come together in small groups. And so that to me has been a kind of evidence of parent preference and a flag for the public system to respond as, again, delivering on this promise of public education. And I'm just, Denise, I'd like to, in our remaining couple minutes, just ask you to reflect on that, because, you know, there are benefits in my mind from an equity standpoint, but then there could also be concern that if we're hearkening back in the present moment to something of a 21st century one-room schoolhouse, that we increase, we get back to also some level of segregation.
Yeah.
And is that a trade-off right now?
Yeah, we ourselves at the Education Trust haven't delved into this particular question. So I don't know that I feel highly skilled at answering that particular question, but I think it is certainly worth some research into that question. You know, our system is already filled with inequities that are sort of baked in. And I think the question is, when we are looking for innovations, you know, almost first and foremost, we would want to see those innovations have equity at their center, and making sure that they are, you know, are we checking on those to make sure that, you know, anti-racism is baked in, that access to, you know, diverse teachers, that, you know, the resources that one learning pod has is comparable, equitable to the resources that another learning pod has. All those questions need to be tested, and pressure tested again and again and again for the different communities that do experience disproportionate and inequitable resources, services, supports already. And I think I haven't talked to our research staff whether that's something that we're going to engage in, but I encourage others right now to start thinking about that.
It's a fascinating question. John, Robin, thoughts on pods, 21st century one-room schoolhouses, their role, their drawbacks?
Yeah, I mean, just risk an opportunity, but the opportunity is pretty cool. So the Oakland Reach has been creating a virtual learning hub in this moment over the summer and now into the fall. They're just taking learning into their own hands in their community and saying, hey, actually, let's use this moment to see what we can do to get kids something that's better than what they were getting previously. And so that's the opportunity here, and really leveraging assets in the community in fundamentally new ways to see what makes sense. We always have to have our eye on equity issues. You know, kids with disabilities sometimes struggle with the social norms of joining small groups like that. And so, yeah, let's be really sensitive to it. But no, this is a crisis. We've got to get kids what they need as fast as possible. And then let's pay attention to the good things and repeat them and stay away from the bad things in the future.
John, last word if you want it.
Last word, I'll just be very quick. Like, I mean, pods are here. Like, I mean, it's not something that policy reformers thought up. It seems to be in response to what parents were being presented. And so that in itself is creating, like, we should just be clear that there are equity challenges too with a lot of the remote learning options that were being offered to kids. And so equity is an issue throughout this. So I agree with Robin and Denise, we got to start with an equity mindset and question and frame first. And I think it's too soon to say we're in the early, I mean, pods didn't really exist until like 5 weeks ago. So research is going to be critical. We just, one of the funders that I work with, we just did a poll, and it turned out it was like even too soon to be able to poll parents, because pods mean too many different things. For some, it's tutoring. For some, it's a half-day series of activity. For some, it's a full day's worth of childcare. And it's like, well, you know, we're going to have to like get better language, and parents are going to have to wrestle with. And again, we'll figure that out. But I do agree, like, the equity concerns are real, but this could be a mechanism, if done in partnership with schools, to close equity gaps, not widen them.
That's right. There is a role for our public structures here, if we're attentive. I want to thank each one of you for taking time out this afternoon to have this conversation with us. It's an ongoing conversation. Our understanding will evolve. Hopefully we'll get some deep research, and we'll be in a very different place, I'm sure, a few months from now, certainly a half a year and a year from now. And I would look forward to continuing our conversation, and we'll look forward to following your work. For those watching us today, we're going to take a couple-week break until September 21st, when we'll join everyone again with a Facebook Live Innovations broadcast during the Pritchard Committee's annual meeting, with 2 special episodes of Innovations that week and the following week, and other virtual events that will help us build off of the conversation on reimagining school for a big, bold future. And so with that, again, a big thanks to Kenya for interpreting for us this afternoon. Alex, Robin, John, and Denise, thank you so much for your good work and for joining us today.
Thank you, Bridget.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kenya.
All right.